Good evening. I'm calling this workshop to order. The time is 5:30 p.m. In accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551, this meeting is officially open with a quorum present. Please note that this evening we will only be addressing the first presentation on the agenda. The second presentation, titled Accelerating Learning at the Core, Strengthening Tier 1 Instruction, has been rescheduled to the board meeting on September 24th. However, if you signed up to speak about the second presentation, you may either share your comments today or wait until the second presentation is listed on the agenda again. So thank you for your understanding and cooperation. And with that, I turn it over to Dr. Ramsey for the presentation regarding the 2024 Fort Worth ISD A through F Accountability Summary.
Thank you very much. I wanted to, before we bring up our Deputy Superintendent of Learning and Leading, provide some context as to why we're here tonight and why we're talking about ratings. And also to thank the board for all of the work that they put in, because it's a lot of studying that they have to do before we get to workshops like this. So first of all, these are not official ratings. These are calculated by our staff based on TEA formulas, because as we know, the official ratings are still held up. And so just want to be very, very clear that we're releasing and we've chosen to release, but they did not come from TEA. The board received on June 13th STAR and EOC data. They received it by campus and by student group, then a presentation on the 21st, which was presented on June 25th with that particular data. We know that on August 12th, a judge blocked the release from TEA, and the original court date was August 26th. Based on last year, we decided at that time that we would hold off presenting anything, because last year we were advised that we needed to hold. However, that court date was moved to the end of September. On August 23rd, I did share with the board in writing that tonight at this meeting we would be sharing ratings, because we believe that we need to be transparent with our community, and also because at the end of the day, the work didn't stop. We received scores, we updated our school performance framework in order to tier support to our schools, and so it only made sense that we would move forward. We know that we're only a handful of school districts across the state that is releasing, and so I thank the board for the opportunity to do that. On September 6th, this board received a lot of data, so we thank you for spending your weekend looking at the presentation, the campus rosters. We elevated again that data that was previously shared in June, and so here we are tonight after the board has done a lot of work, staff has done a lot of work, and I have the honor of introducing our Deputy Superintendent of Learning and Leading, Mohammed Chaudhry, who is going to walk us through the presentation.
Good evening, trustees. Can you hear me fine? All right, let's jump right in. Good evening, everyone, the audience, and our wonderful school leadership team today who's showed up, so I don't feel alone, so I love that they're here. So let's jump right into our presentation. So we've been in the A through F system for a while now in the state of Texas, right? It completely changed how accountability works, right? And ultimately, it revolves around three big domains, right? Achievement, school progress, and closing the gaps. That's been steady for a while. Now, there's been massive changes to the tests and the methodology, but in terms of the A through F system and the domains, that's been steady for a while now, right? And that's not gonna change anytime soon. In terms of what that looks like, right, we know when it comes to the A through F system, the heart of it is student learning. So achievement or progress counts for 70% of a campus's overall score, and then 30% is closing the gap. And then on the achievement side, one of the progressive moves that Texas did was being able to take the best of growth and achievement, because we know historically, when you look at socioeconomic data, that tracks with achievement, right? But really the best predictor of school quality is growth. Are you growing the kids you have, regardless of where they're at? So that's the heart of the accountability system at the end of the day. That hasn't changed, right? In terms of how much growth you need to do, that has been upgraded over time, especially over the last 2 years. So that's important to note. High schools have an additional set of layers to it, right, when it comes to student achievement, specifically graduation data and CCMR, right, college and career and military readiness. So in addition to looking at all of the other indicators at the elementary level, it also brings in whether or not our students are graduating college and career and military readiness, and you can demonstrate that in multiple ways, taking dual credit, AP, the Texas Success Initiative, right? Multiple ways to show that. And then, of course, graduation rate, right? And how are you graduating every cohort at the highest level you can be, if not 100% of your kids. When it comes to our data, right, and this is the first data trend for us that I'm going to share today as we continue on with this presentation. On CCMR, we are kicking butt. Just to put it this way, right? We have, while the standard for measuring CCMR has gotten a whole lot tougher, right? We have held our own in terms of where we are and with our peers, with exceeding some of them. So that means that 80% or more, projected 86% with this most recent class, right? They're graduating CCMR ready, right? And again, you can achieve that in multiple ways, right? You can achieve that by enlisting in the military, earning industry-based certifications, right? Taking dual credit. And a student can do multiple things to get it. So, right, but they gotta at least achieve one of them. So just when you have questions later, happy to talk about that. Just fun fact on this, 40% of our kids are actually TSI ready. When you look at this data, what that means is 40% of the kids are prepared to take credit-bearing courses in community college. And TSI doesn't always align with STAR, right? So with STAR, if you looked at that data, it wouldn't say 40%, right? It would say lower, but actually TSI shows that many of our kids actually are ready for college bearing, just to show like the disconnect between assessment systems that we have in our state. Sometimes it's important to have that. Let's talk about the new STAR. So several upgrades, right? When it comes to making apples to apples comparisons, right? If you are going to conduct, statistically significant comparison responsibly, intellectually honest, right? You got to look at the last 2 years, because what the grade was before the last 2 years, whole different methodology, right? It was a lot easier, relatively speaking, to get the B, to get the A. There are campuses who moved up, right, in terms of proficiency, but tanked and came down to an overall grade this year, right? Across the state, they went from a B to a C to a D, some dropped from a C to an F. But it's very important to know in terms of the rules being the same, right? The last 2 years are your, in terms of comparison, is statistically responsible versus taking it over the last 3 years. So just something important to note. Let's talk about some of the changes they have made. So I like to say that STAR, regardless of math, science, history, it's a reading test, right? It's much more heavier on reading, right? Algebra test is a reading test, right? The passages, the context is a whole lot deeper, right? A whole lot more close reading, a whole lot more information is put together. So every test is a reading test, including the algebra test. And there's much more writing, right? That's why writing across the curriculum is very important in our district. And so writing is much more heavier in terms of the success criteria in deeming our students prepared to be able to write very compelling, persuasive, evidence-backed writing pieces. And so the STAR goes much more deeper in that than any other previous year. Let's talk about some other changes. So cross-curricular thinking. That's why it is much more important. People often talk about science of reading. Kids need to know phonics and decoding, right? But Another part that people don't talk about enough is content knowledge, right? Knowing a lot of content is big, especially when you look at the new tests, right? When you have these interdisciplinary passages. So social studies and science should not be taking a back seat, right? And when you think about just the socioeconomic disparities, right, there's things that you just don't get when you think about zip codes and your home life and other things that are just even more important, that you're getting that content knowledge through the curriculum you've adopted as well as your daily experiences. So that's very, very important. Like, that's the other half of science of reading that hasn't gotten enough love. And this test is definitely gonna test that when it comes to our kids. Let's talk about some other changes. The methodology for becoming CCMR ready, I talked about that, right? Got a whole lot more, the bar increased, right? Not only have they basically scaled down in terms of what industry-based certification, what the cut points are for being CCMR ready, but in terms of how much it counts and how it's calculated, that has changed. The other big thing is growth. Growth is the best measure for school quality, but in terms of the pace of growth and how much you need to grow your kids, right, that bar has increased significantly, right? It's not even enough just to grow a little bit. You gotta grow a whole lot more than any other previous year. So hence why we had schools across the state that went up, but then went backwards in ratings. It's just the growth, the pace is not enough. And yeah, we as a district, we're on the rise, but we are nowhere where we need to be when it comes to the pace of growth, which needs to accelerate, especially when we think about this year and beyond. Other things to talk about when it comes to changes, closing the gap, right? That calculation, right? Not only are you growing your kids, but are you narrowing that yawning 40-point achievement gap that has existed in our state, in our country, between white, black, poor, well off, right? Have we been closing and narrowing the gap? It's my favorite measure in the state accountability system, right? Because it brings everyone up to a level and standard, including think about your more affluent districts, right? If you have students who are disadvantaged, are they also closing the gap, right? You might have an A on achievement, but you might have a D or a C on closing the gap, especially if you're not narrowing that gap between English learners as well as, black, white, when you think about your economic disadvantage, non-economic disadvantaged students. So that has increased the pressure to do close that gap. And then again, just the methodology for things in terms of how you calculate the overall ratings has just gotten a whole lot tougher. And when I say tougher, I really mean raise the bar for improvement in our state. So that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing. It just means we all need to step up our game more in terms of how fast we improve for all students. And truly, when you look at the closing the gap, that's what it means. No more hiding behind the averages in the state of Texas when it comes to any of our schools. So let's talk about just a little quick history on state assessment, right? This is not the up and down. The up and down effect is exactly accurate in terms of every time, right, when the state has shifted accountability methodology and introduced the new test and raised the bar, right, the state as a whole and districts in the aggregate tank in terms of what proficiency was at that time or growth was at that time, and then they adapt and they rise again. So this is exactly what's playing out, and it's not a new story line, right? This happened when you think back to like the whole Common Core era, right? Just when standards got raised, when you think about moving from TAKS to TEKS to where we are today, right? The up-down effect play around. The key thing is, are you adapting and raising the bar? And a true test of the system long-term will be, as these changes happen, right, is the instruction that you've been providing your students hold steady with the changes that happen. And for a lot of our state this year, right, it hasn't been, right? People are having to adapt and grow. The question is, how fast do you rebound? So that's something we'll talk about as well later on. So let's talk about some of our results. So you can see here, right, this is just a global view, and then I'll go a little more deeper. You can see where we were in terms of the last 2 years and where we grew, right? And where we didn't grow and stayed the same, or where we went backwards, right? And so just something to look at. In terms of the number of areas that we grew in, right? These are the areas we grew in 3 to 8. So everywhere you see listed here, we had upward movement, whether it's 1 point, right, 2 points, we had upward movement. I had the team run something just because I'm a nerd like that. I had them run like how many % of our kids were only 2 or 3 questions away from reaching approaches or meets. So I have the full grade level breakdown of that, but I'm gonna give you some example of this. So in 3rd grade math, right, we had 9% of our kids, right, who were literally 2 or 3 questions away from meeting approaches. I'll give you another example. In 3rd grade math, for meets, we had 11% of our kids who were just 3 questions away from hitting meets. Another example, in 6th grade math, 20% of our kids were 2 or 3 questions away from hitting approaches, which would have taken our approaches scores to 70%. Across the board, when I look at K all the way from 3 to 12 in EOC, algebra is another one, for example, we had 16% of our kids that were away from approaches with 2 or 3 questions. We moved a lot of kids that much more closer. That you don't get points, you get points for growth, but you don't get to see that in the overall reporting. And so what that means to me, what our charge is here, our principles is, you are right there within reaching a whole other level. If we moved these kids, right, our grade today would have been a solid B, right? So we're right there. And what these kids get versus kids who were far off from in terms of reaching approaches, they were not within 2 or 3 questions, is very different. But what we often do is treat them the same. And by the way, those 3rd graders who were 2 to 3 questions away, they're also readers. It doesn't mean they can't read because they didn't hit meets. You have to do a whole lot of reading to even just be 2 or 3 questions away. The equivalent I always get is we all got A's and B's in college and we got credit for the class. No one said after the fact that you don't know your stuff, right? And so that's kind of the equivalent I give at times when people make that comparison on how we talk about growth. Just something I like to share, but this data is more so for our principals, so they don't give the same treatment when we think about interventions and supports and small groups and such. Let's look at EOCs. Again, you can see in our high school, we had larger gains, meaning we had 2 points, right, more than 1 point movement upward, and less in terms of the reverse trend or no movement. So this is just a global view of that. And then here's just some highlights from that. Like, for example, in Algebra 1, 2 points, right, moving in, right, biology, look at English, 61 to 63, right, we had very noticeable gains when it comes to approaches and above in our high school level, more so than 3 to 8. So just something to think about in terms of cohorting. Another thing to think about, a stat I want to give you guys historically, and yes, this study has been done, it's in my other presentation. Historically, in the state of Texas, just taking the state, when you have a kid who is not proficient, did not meet, and you run it for 3 years. So they go from, say they're not meets at 4th grade, then they go to 5th grade and 6th grade. Only 5% of kids actually hit meets, right? It is very difficult to close that gap. What that means, the research shows 3 years, it takes 3 years to transform a school. It takes 3 solid teachers to narrow the achievement gap. But it is easier said than done. So we always make these comparisons, but I love cohort data because every cohort is supposed to get a better version of ourselves. So if kids are low in 3rd grade, where are they 3 years later, right? That's the data that I want to obsess about the most. And are we guaranteeing a solid teacher every those years that come after? So just something to think about in terms of how we narrow the gap. I gave you the stat historically at the state of Texas. Only 4 to 5% of kids cross that threshold to meets in 3 years. That's not a lot of kids when you think about it, right? And we need to do much more better than that if we're ever gonna narrow the gap. Let's go on to our ratings. So how did we do? So overall, as you can see from the last 2 years, we have reduced the number of DNF schools, or what I will deem as low performing, and we have increased the number of C and A and B schools, right? A and B schools have moved up significantly, not quite double, but in terms of our trend, if we pick up the pace even further, I would hope that we have a really huge year this year, especially at this pace. We should do better than this pace than the previous year. So that's just the global view of our grades. Here's another view, detailed view. If people asked how many exact F-rated schools did we have, right? Just something to look at here as well. Another stat that I had asked them to run, just because my brain was just, moving in different direction, 30% of our campuses were actually 3 points away from another letter grade up. So that's another stat to know as well. They're right there. So either from an F to a D to a C to a D to a C to a C to a B or a B to an A. 30% of our campuses across K-12, including our alternative campuses, right, were 3 points away from the next grade up. So if they move and these campuses hold steady, we're going to have a really big year. And so just something else to know as well in terms of where we're at. Here are the campuses that did move up at least one letter grade. So 30% of our campuses, right, did move up at least one letter grade, as you can see who they are. And we also gave you a handout that has the full list of campuses, right, organized by level, that tells you how much they moved. And again, I wanted to share that stat. There was another 30% who were just close to moving just within 3 points, just like those students who were off by a few questions. It was within striking distance. So that's a big deal, and we should not lose that momentum. 2 grades, right? We had 9% of our schools move 2 grades up, as you can see, and I'm gonna spotlight some of these schools because I'm all about case studies and what's happening in those schools, and we need to study them and replicate practices. So you can see where we moved from an F to a C, F to a C, right? Different movement here, D to a B, right? And then we had 2 campuses move up 3 letter grades, right? That is very, very difficult to do, and they definitely kicked butt. And as you can see, F to a B is really big. Now the key thing is we don't want that B to become weak. We want that B to become stronger. If not, they jump to an A, right? So their B needs to be strengthened at minimum this year, if not jumping another grade. Let's look at the campuses that maintain their A rating. So as you can see, some of these campuses have maintained their A rating for a long time. Just looking at those campuses and what lessons are there, what they say. Some of them are different in terms of how enrollment works, right? The demographics are different as well. But what is important to see is that their bar for quality did not regress. They held their own and they raised the bar. So that's a big deal as well, because they couldn't just keep the things the same as usual. They had to actually grow kids and maintain, right? You had to move your kids from meets to masters, right? When I go to YWLA, I want to see more master's kids, right? I want to see more kids passing AP tests. I want to see SAT averages that are above national averages, right? Given how you arrive at that campus, right? So just they're holding their own, so that's a good thing. Let's look at some case studies. And the reason why I do this is when people say it can't be done, this I put in front of them to say absolutely it can be done, right? You can persist and surmount the challenges that come from both socioeconomic status as well as other historical challenges our students and communities may have. So Sagamore Elementary, right? Sagamore Hill Elementary moved up 2 grades from an F to a B. And you can just see the stats in terms of what they moved, right? They moved significantly. In some grades, double digits. 5th grade math scores increased 13% at the meets level. That pace is amazing. That's double digits. That's very difficult to do. And look at the demographics. That's as disadvantaged and high needs as they come in the state of Texas, as well as when you look at our special population of emerging bilingual and special education. So we need more schools, all of our schools, operating at this level. So it is our challenge to bring that relentless consistency of what is happening there everywhere else and learning from each other. The answers are here. The answers are not like, we don't need to go buy some shiny thing. They're already here. Let's look at another one. This one, you're gonna wonder why I brought an F to a D, because I want you to see how hard it is to move from an F to a D at the middle school level. And our middle schools is where we really need to raise our game. That's where we see many families opting out, right? And then coming back in high school. That's where we have a whole other developmental spurt, right? They're not quite high schoolers, they're not quite elementary, but they are definitely going through a whole lot of hormones, and the brain goes through another spurt. So I'm a middle school person, so it takes a very special kind of folks to be able to drive the needle there. But just look at the results that it took just to get out of that F state. And this was, I know, one of our 1882 partnerships that didn't go well. And so this is us on our own rather than through a partner, right? So they are kicking butt at Jack A, and it's very impressive. And just look at the movement they had, right, across approaches and meets. Double digits just to get to that point of moving from an F to a D. So they just got to keep that pace, if not increase it. Let's look at a high school. So I'm showing every level. Here's a high school, as large and as stable in terms of enrollment as they come, as poor in terms of student needs and economic disadvantage, as high as you see in many places in our system, right? And a very high emerging bilingual population and special education population that is reflective of, when you think about averages, again, they move from an F to a C. They had amazing movement. The one that I love is 45% to 59% for African American students on STAR EOC algebra. So yes, it can be done. It can be done 10 times, 100 times over, and Southwest has answers to it. And so, that principal and that staff and that algebra teacher needs to be folks we study and leverage with other teachers as well. And we don't do that enough sometimes, and that's something that we want to raise our game in and doing better. Again, the answers are here, and so this is just another example. Notice the schools I chose. These are just, they serve all students. There's no choice, there's no selective admissions, right? It's as, it's as reflective as it comes when it comes to our population. I wanted to show you some teacher examples. The school may be an F, or the school may have not moved, but there are teachers within those schools who kicked butt. I kept it anonymous for the sake of this presentation, right? Just because I wanted to, I felt like it was better for me to keep it anonymous. But here are real teacher examples at some of our middle schools, because in middle schools we have not moved, and I chose middle schools on purpose because middle schools we're nowhere where we need to be in terms of our grade and movement, other than some of the case studies. But look at the movement of those single teachers, what they did with their students. So that's the level we need all of our teachers performing in, right? 79% of the kids moved at least one achievement level up. 65% grew, right? Reading and math, those two examples, right? Now, every principal, all of us should know who those teachers are, and we should be leveraging their talents and seeing who they are and making sure that they're not an island to themselves, right? And what's happening. And we have several examples of this across the system, right? Even in schools that may have not moved in the aggregate, but within the school themselves, there are stories of great, great success. And again, that pace of improvement is amazing. That's what we want to see. Another example, set of teachers from elementary, as you can see, again, significant movement, well over 50% of their kids, they're moving at least one grade level. Again, very, very significant movement in terms of what those teachers are doing, and they're growing the kids that they get. Absolutely, right? I want to make sure that they are part of our TII, Teacher Incentive Allotment Program, right? If they're not, these teachers definitely have to be eligible for the next cohort in terms of when we designate teachers. They're definitely doing amazing things, as you can see. Again, I give you the demographics of their campus and where they're working. Again, these are proof points of what's possible at scale. These are not one-off outliers or something happened. This is just amazing work happening with all subgroups, by the way, right? Pick any student group, they're moving the needle. How did we do overall? So as you can see, our overall grade moved from a D to a C, just doing an apples to apples comparison, right? We moved from we're right on the border of a C. We need to definitely have a really big year to never be near that, but we are right there. Right, our peers in Dallas, they're also at a C. They went down from a B, going back a few years as well. And again, it's very, very important that we keep the pace. We went up by 6 points. Would love to see us just jump that threshold to a B. It's definitely very possible, but definitely we're holding our own in terms of being on the rise and growing. Not fast enough though, absolutely, and we all know that. And so that's where we need to pick up the pace. I always like to show this view, right? So folks really get a sense of how many kids are attending low-performing schools, and by low-performing, by definition, are D and F schools who have been in a D or F or newly D or F versus our C schools who are more at a stable state and looking to further rise. You can see we have cut the number of students attending low-performing schools by 36%. We had a significant rise as soon as the test methodology changed. You can see that it changed, it's right on there. And then we immediately began cutting that, right? Would love to see that shaved down well beyond, if not, would love to see it at 0 by the end of next year. That's always the goal, but we should have even a bigger dramatic increase than what we had here, which was even more, which was significant as well, especially our multi-year IR schools. Just another view in terms of what % of our 70,000 kids are actually attending schools that are Ds and Fs. Just another view of it. And then with that, I'll stop for questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. Thank you, team. At this time, are there any comments or questions from trustees? Dr. Rodriguez?
Hi. Okay, so it says, you just said that, that we need to pick up the pace.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? Because I hear that criticism, we're in a turnaround, a system that needs to be turned around.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand it takes time, but you said we need to pick up the pace. Is it because we have a stronger foundation now that we can pick up the pace, or what was it?
I think there's several things that happened, right? We adopted new curriculum, right? And teachers become comfortable with it and have mastered that more in some places. In some places, they're using it, right? We have gotten tighter on our systems. It's all about consistency, Trustee Rodriguez. So when I say pick up the pace in being very consistent in what is happening at Sagamore is happening in every elementary school, right? Picking up the pace of what happened at, right, the high school example I gave you, what's happening at that individual teacher, pick up the pace in our coaching, our consistency in reinforcing, in ensuring those fundamental conditions that enabling those schools to thrive, making sure that's true regardless of zip code or school. That is something that's very important. And we have all the right pieces in place, right? I know right before I came, there was a significant shrinking of central office. So even in the midst of that and adopting new curriculum and new methodology, right, we rebounded. And so now there's no reason for us to not even say rebound anymore. We're just on the rise, right? And so when I say pick up the pace, the A shouldn't take 5 years, right? We should be able to do it within the next 3. That B should happen no more than the 2, but I would hope we could pull it off by this year. That would be my hope. And it is possible. We can do it. We have amazing talent here, and we have all the pieces.
I agree,
yeah.
and I understand. I mean, everybody wants it done immediately. And then I just had another question on like Southwest High School. Well, let me preface that by saying Northside jumped from an F to a C, and that principal has been there 10 years. So I'd like to think it's because of the new administration, the new focus on Tier 1 learning.
Yep.
So now, since Southwest did very well, was that a new or an established principal? And the same with Sagamore Hills, just your
Yeah.
case studies, just so I can know.
Yeah.
If
I was told that I might get asked that, so I created my cheat sheet to know of them, because I'm a month in, so I'm getting to know everyone. So Principal Carrick at Sagamore has been there 3 years, right? This is their 4th, right? And at Jacquet, Principal Barrett has been there 2 years, right? And then at South Hills, Principal Engel has been there 9 years. So they've all been there at least 2, right? But definitely they've been there multiple years when you look at, but 2, 3, 9. So he's been there at South Hills for 9 years. Southwest for 9 years. Thank you.
That's good, because that's what I tell people. We are headed in the right direction. We are nowhere close to being happy, but I am positive in how we're going, the direction we're going. So I like that. And I also had an achievement gap. We haven't talked about that as much as we used to. I was on the board from 2004 to 2008, and that was a big thing about the achievement gap. So now, how is the achievement gap? What is it now? With pre-COVID, do we have those numbers?
We do. In the big detail report I gave you, that gives you the what percent of white, black, emerging bilingual, you have all of that. And so we still have gaps, right? But now with the closing the gap domain, right, we have to narrow that over time. It really, as a system, we still have 30, some places 40-point gaps, right? Especially when you look at students with special needs, as well as their typically developmental peers, right? Like there's big gaps. But then when you go to schools and you see that it's within 10 points, or when you see within a single teacher's classroom that all kids grew and some of the students who were historically behind group, we have examples of where that gap does not have to be the big system-wide gap we have. So when we have to pick up the pace on consistency, we're gonna have to narrow those gaps. That B, you're not gonna get, or that A, you're not gonna get unless you move closing close the gap on those. Closing the gap domain, TA has made rules on like, you're not gonna be able to get A ultimately if not just on achievement and growth, it also has to be that you've narrowed gaps. That's the world that's what they have set now. So we're narrowing, but not where we need to be just yet.
Okay, and I agree. And how does tier 1 instruction correlate with closing the gap, or is those two different?
It's your first teach. You cannot intervene your way to narrowing the achievement gap. There's no way. Intervention, a special intervention program, after school, before school tutoring, yeah, that helps. Ultimately, 80% of your kids, we'll talk more about it at the end of the month in my other presentation, but it's that first teach. When you deliver a concept, if I were to stand up right now and deliver a lesson to you guys, right, and knowing all the different entry points and what you bring to the table, because I've done an assessment to see where you're at, I've designed that lesson in a way that it makes sure that you all master it, at least 80% of you. That's what the research shows. That first teach, when I deliver it, and all the resources I use, the tools I use, right, the way I support you in that lesson, whatever the time band is, right, 80% of you should have mastered it by then. It's that other 20% that needs small group or one-to-one. But we're at a point where our first teach, in some places, more than half of the class did not get it. It's the design of that first teach and how we've done it. So that's what we mean by tier 1 instruction. We're not going to intervene our way out of closing the gap. We're going to have to use, when they're all there that day, ready to learn, right? And in the classroom, when you have all your students, that first teach, you got to be able to deliver. And research shows when you're firing on all cylinders, 80% of your students should be able to master that concept. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's what we mean by tier 1.
Okay, and then the tier 2 and tier 3, is that more for
Small
closing the
group,
gap?
so think about tier 2 more so small group, right? So when a teacher takes a small group and does small group instruction with them, and then tier 3, you start hitting into one-on-one, and then and depending on whether or not that student is everything you're trying to respond to, you might make referrals out to special education or other things as well. But right now, it's a tier 1 problem. Even for special education, especially the vast majority of our students who are mild to moderate on their IEP in terms of their development, it's a tier 1 problem. If all kids rise, they're gonna rise too. Obviously, we have students who have more moderate to extreme needs. That's different in terms of what their development looks like, but it's a tier 1 problem. So we have all kinds of tier 2, we have all kinds of tier 3, we have all kinds of small grouping. It's that first teach and how we deliver it.
Okay, so tier 1 is the first teach, and
Yeah.
that's for, I know this is gonna be a presentation, I'm sorry for doing
That's
this.
okay.
But tier 1 would be every subject, every grade, or is
Yes.
it just when the first day of school?
Whether it's a math classroom or an English classroom, it's that lesson. You know, say you have to do 12 lessons over like, you know, a month or something or 2 months, and I plan out my lessons and I design that lesson and I deliver it to you, right, with the time blocks I have with you. It's when I first deliver that lesson to you and then I assess you, I check for understanding, whether it be an exit ticket or whatever formative assessment using. 80% of the students should be able to master that concept on your first teach. That's just not happening. That just means some of our teachers, right, are not where they need to be yet when it comes to delivering that first teach really well. That's where we're trying to raise our bar and our game and our coaching, is that first teach. We will still do small group and everything, but we're not gonna be intervene half the class in small groups in order to narrow the gap. That's not gonna work over time. It's just, it hasn't. I mean, that's the state we've been in, yeah.
Right, it's been 20 years of
Yeah.
stagnant. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Trustee Bridges?
First, thank you for the presentation. Can you help me out why we didn't break it down by subgroups? Because my biggest concern with African American students, but we were really, really struggling. I wanted to see if we had some movement in that category.
Yeah, so we have it. I gave that in the extended report, and so you should have that with you. And so that's available to the public. And absolutely, Trustee Bridges, we have not moved our African-American students at the pace that they need to be. But we have several examples of where it's happening, right? And so we have not delivered that consistency where we need to be. But we have that data and we shared it. And
Yes,
so-
we shared it with the board on June 13th and on Friday, but we can resend that out this evening so that you have it at the top of your email.
Yeah.
Okay, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me. And I'm gonna ask the same question I asked a year ago, because we were pretty much looking at the same thing when it came to African American students. Why do you think we're not moving at the same pace?
Because it's the legacy of the soft bigotry of low expectations in this country. That's what it's been. That's what it's been. It's been around forever. It's the soft bigotry of low expectations. And it's been around and that's something we need to overcome and continue to make sure that we are providing high quality tier 1 to them and where we're at, just as a system.
Okay, nowhere
I'm
across.
not gonna give you a special program or anything, because wherever we've been and wherever the needle has moved, it's about high-quality Tier 1 instruction and making sure that everyone is getting grade-level content, whether it's the east side or the west side. And right now, when you walk classrooms, you don't always see that, sometimes in some places.
When you dig into the numbers and you look at some of the schools where we saw some huge movement, were we able to look at what was happening with African American students at those schools?
Teachers are delivering amazing Tier 1 instruction at grade level content, and they're getting what they need, the right intervention at the right time. But that first teach, they're delivering. I was at Middlebrook, the Brook today, and the east side. Amazing work happening there, right? Grade level content, right? That school is on the verge to doing amazing things, but between comparing that to 2 years ago to where it's at today, right? They're teaching grade level content, they're using the high quality instructional material we've approved, they're getting that on a consistent basis. That wasn't always the case, right? People were pulling resources that were leveled down from what sixth graders were getting and such. It's the notion that, we have honors classes now, we have several sections of honors classes at that campus. We didn't have that before, but we had it in other places, even though many kids, the honors class was the most packed today. And it's not like they weren't there, right? And so the fact that we're even offering several sections of honors classes is amazing. So to me, it's expectations at grade level and delivering that content in a developmentally appropriate way. And then for the students who need that extra help, delivering that at the right time, at the right moment.
And I apologize because I didn't dig to the numbers. What's the percentage that you're noticing as far as increase when it comes to reading with African American students?
In terms of increasing percentage, do you want to go ahead? Got it.
And the reason I'm a little, because this is
On a system-wide gain, it depends on the grade level. Some grades 1%, some grades 3%, some grades 4%. It depends on what grade you're asking, and so depending on the grade. And then at the school that I shared with you at the high school, you saw 10+% gain on African American for algebra. As a system, we are not moving at the pace of that high school across all of our high schools. And so at the system level, it's single digits or staying the same, right? Or in some grades, moved back, right? But in terms of places where we are moving double digits, we are. So that's why I gave that example to show, right, it is happening, but that consistency of what's happening in that classroom is not playing out in every single one of those algebra classes where African-American students are enrolled.
And this is my last point. If I'm an African-American mother, grandmother, grandpa, uncle who's contemplating on sending my kids to school, and when I ask the question, why do you think that we're not moving, would that be an answer that would be sufficient to them?
No, because at the end of the day, where you are enrolled, you absolutely have to get that guaranteed excellence. So absolutely, it's not sufficient, right? And so for that parent, right, I'm also a school choice person, so if they want to opt into another high-performing school in our system, I don't want to lose them, right? Then I would want to empower them to do that. I mean, I've done that in other places. But no, if they are not satisfied, if their elementary is not where it needs to be, right? But our promise is that it will be, right? And it needs to be, and we need to take it there. But that's not an overnight phenomenon, but we need to be there, right? But it would not be sufficient. I agree with you.
And this really is the last point.
Yep.
I would hope that we have a better way of explaining that, because I believe that the numbers that we're losing from the district, because so much of the feedback that I get from parents is that's their biggest concern, that we are not doing what we need to do when it comes to African American students. And I would challenge us to even, and I know at one point we talked about pulling up the numbers, when we start looking at the numbers that we're losing, and I know this to be a fact from my own visual, to the call it competition, whatever you want to call it, the other schools in the area, I guarantee you that's where a lot of our loss is coming from. So we've got to, just like you said, there has to be more of a sense of urgency, because I'm not kidding you, I could almost record this conversation a year ago, and it's almost like I'm hearing the same thing. So, thank you.
Trustee Durr.
Thank you, President Martinez. And thank you for this report. Several questions. One, with the CCMR ratings that we have, you mentioned that some students, and I know some of those students can qualify for or are identified as CCMR ready based on multiple different evaluation tools, TSI, SAT, AP classes, whatever it may be. Do they only count, even students who qualify in multiple ways, do they just count once, or does that?
Once.
Each student counts once?
Yeah.
Okay.
So 80+% of our kids who are CCMR ready, it's not duplicate counts in that.
Okay,
Yeah,
so our Uber achievers are not carrying those who
No.
are not achieving?
Yeah. Where you would see duplication is if I gave you the breakdown on TSI, dual credit, associate's degree, and I showed you different percentages, a kid could be in every one of those percentages, or some of them,
Okay.
Yeah, but not what I showed you,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. Another question, you mentioned about leveraging the talents of high-performing teachers. How are we doing that?
So, I mean, I'll give you the version for this presentation, but ultimately it's several things. The PLC is the most powerful space, right? That is where your professional learning community is where you and your colleagues converge, right? And so that is the most important engine, right? And then you have, right, being able to look at each other's practice and provide feedback, right? And so how are we leveraging, right, our schedules? How are we leveraging that teacher who's struggling to be able to deliver a specific concept, or they're not growing their emerging bilingual students, but their colleague across the hallway is. And they being able to free up that teacher, right, being able, whether it be you can create a sub that day, you can have the administrator step in, and being able to see their colleague, being able to do it. Sometimes that's what it takes. You have to actually see it. You have to be able to see someone do that. We don't do enough of that, right? But I mean, it takes scheduling to do that well. And then of course there's the PLC, I'll come back to that. Ultimately, those are going to be the greatest engines. We can bring them into a workshop and we can give them sit and get PD. We can give them, that will work for some, but a good chunk of our teachers, you got to see a colleague do it. You got to have the peer effect of an amazing colleague. The hope is that amongst your colleagues, right, there's at least one in your grade level who is the model, right? So that's very important, because if one is not the model, then you have to think about other ways, right? It involves coaching all three, but also being able to take them to a different campus and being able to see excellent practice as well. That's something that we're thinking through on school leadership side and how we leverage, because the answers are in the system. The answers aren't outside or some kind of consultant or program that we're gonna buy. So
And we'll provide in writing to the board our pilot of 3 schools that are doing opportunity culture that allows a high-quality master teacher to continue working in their classroom, but also provide coaching in their grade level at their school.
At the first day of school, I believe we visited a campus that you asked what's an MCL, and I said multi-classroom teacher leadership. I forget what the campus is. What was the campus called? I'm still memorizing.
It was Hazel Harvey.
Hazel
Pease.
Harvey.
Yes, we were
Yeah.
there and we were in the hallway and there was a teacher who was going to be an MCL teacher. So that's an example of strategic staffing. That teacher gets a stipend, right? And we leverage them to be a practitioner coach. It's one thing, we have a lot of coaches who don't teach, but a practitioner coach is someone who also walks the walk you're walking, but also coaches you. But we also recognize that teacher for the extra work that they're doing with that stipend. So we have several campuses that are also, we are getting more strategic in how we make that happen.
Well, and I remember being impressed with that program when I was there, to see that, and that was the first I'd heard of it. And thank you for the terminology that I was not coming up with in this moment. But I was also pleased that that practitioner coach was, one, financially, monetarily compensated for the additional effort, but then also there was time carved out of her day in order to ensure that she wasn't trying to teach a full load and provide coaching, because we all know that teachers are working hard right now, and they're working many long hours, and they don't need more to do on top of what they're already doing. So I was glad to see that not only the monetary compensation was there, but then also the time during the day for her to provide that coaching. So thank you for reminding me about that. I want to ask a couple questions. You mentioned a lot about consistency, and I agree. Consistency is key. And the STAR test, we place a lot of weight as a state of Texas, as a community, as a school district, as teachers. Teachers, it's defeating to get scores back that aren't reflective of the hard work that they've put in, or maybe
With that, and I'll tell you why. Look at the rebound effect we're having. Look at the rebound effect. So I can talk to you all the nerdy technical reasons why it is, and that is all public. But if the rebound effect was not happening, right, when you look at students as, economic disadvantage as it gets, right, in our city, right, who are reflective of our population, moving, right, bounds and mountains in terms of the needle on achievement, that's a reliable and valid test. When you look at, right, the methodology has increased, the types of question has changed, right? It's more open response. They're more simulating AP exams, right? If you really think about the STAR test nowadays, think about DBQs, think about open response, think about writing if you taking those tests. But the rebound effect, ultimately, if I were to just put it in like one sentence or less, the rebound effect would not be as quick in the school and the system. So it is a reliable and valid test for that very reason. If the rebound effect was not, right? And it like, right, just then you question the reliability. And I would be on that side of people who are accusing TA of that. Personally, that's a losing battle.
Have they published anything about the new test, though?
They have the 2019 validity report, and they have all the technical guides that they have. So they have published all the 2022 assessment methodology and guides. That's all been up and such. It's just some folks are asking, you need to also do a study, another study on validity on this current test. But their argument, which will hold, is that the 2019 study holds with these tests, right? Just because we changed up the question types and made it more rigorous in the level of growth and pace used to have, doesn't mean it's not a reliable and valid test. And so they've put that out, and that's their stance. I know their hearing is coming up. That's exactly what they're gonna tell them. And just if I were to tell a parent or a teacher, and the rebound effect is what ultimately comes down to it. Like if you didn't see that in a very significant way, then I would bring into question and challenge it.
Yeah, and I would also share that, you know, that there's value in the lagging indicator for us.
I'm sorry, in what?
In the lagging
Okay, thank
indicator,
you.
so that's more summative, the STAR test, the graduation rate, because that helps us create those 5-year goals, right, in the strategic plan. And it allows our teachers to see their new class where they were. On the day-to-day instruction, it's those leading indicators. It's what's happening. It's that exit ticket. It's that local assessment. It's the formative assessment that allows you and your professional learning community to make adjustments to your instruction. And so I think that there's value to both, but there is, in our state in particular, a spotlight on one and not necessarily a spotlight on the things that actually affect teacher and students on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Trustee Lynch?
So I guess a couple questions. This was very helpful and thoughtful. Appreciate you. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I appreciate the presentation and thank you for putting this together. I guess a couple things just from a public record standpoint. I know we kind of talked through some of the highlights, but are all of the scores for all of the schools going to be public?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's-
sir.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure.
Going forward from today, there's no reason why no one should have any of access to that.
Okay, and where will that information, if someone wanted to go find it, where would they go to find it?
So we can absolutely put it on the website. We have our weekly message that we put out to our community and to our families. And so we'll provide a link to that. We definitely didn't want to get in front of the board,
Yeah.
so after the workshop, we'll present that information publicly.
Okay, awesome. And then as I look about accountability ratings, you have student achievement and school progress. When you look at where we moved, it's either or. And so is there a potential that if there was a lot of school progress that you could fall back if that progress doesn't continue? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, so you gotta maintain your growth and have growth, basically the percent growth that we had just to reach where we at right now, right? We gotta, when I said pick up the pace, we gotta, if we moved by 5 points here, we gotta push for 10, 15 point gains there. So the growth, that's the best of. So if we maintain just the growth we had right now, it may not be enough, especially on closing the gap, the conversation we had, right, in order to raise our grade. That's what TEA has done. It's not only said that, hey, you need to grow the kids where you're at, right? You need to move Muhammad from 5 to 10, 15, 20, 30, but the pace of improvement that you're giving for him also needs to narrow with the groups that are a whole lot higher than him. So so if we don't both maintain, actually, let me say different, exceed pace for all of our groups and our students who have historically been behind pick up the pace even further than their other peers, then no, we're not going to hit that higher grade, what's coming ahead.
Okay. And I guess second question, of the schools we have in our district, how many are using their student achievement number versus school progress? Is that Does that make sense?
There's no one using that, just that's how the state, that's how the rules are applied, right? They'll take the best stuff. That's not, we don't get to choose and say, we're gonna take this one. They're gonna automatically fall back to the best stuff.
But
So
do we know which one they're choosing when they choose?
for the vast majority of our schools, for our student population demographics and everything, it's growth.
Okay.
For some of our schools, it's achievement, but I will tell you, your Tanglewoods and your other schools that demographically are not reflective of our broader system, they're growing their kids a lot too, which I was very impressed with. Sometimes what you see with schools with demographics that are more like that is they just maintain, right? But are they taking more kids to masters? Are they strengthening the MEET score? And we saw that. In fact, their growth outpaced even some of our high poverty schools, which was very impressive, which was very exciting for me because sometimes folks don't do that.
Okay. And then, Dr. Ramsey, one of the things we talk about is kind of, and you mentioned, is earned autonomy. And so as we speak to people that are having success, what does that look like in our district, whether it's at a school level or a teacher level? How do we know, who's kind of proven that they're doing all the right things?
So about a little over a year ago, we presented the school performance framework to the board to show kind of that tiered support model. So based on that school performance framework, the higher achieving, the less support you need. And so that's how we're assisting our campuses. So you earn the autonomy based on your performance, both academically and then behaviorally.
So is it fair to say that the autonomy piece is receiving less support?
The autonomy piece is both not needing as much service, but also a variety of ways that campuses have. So principal has the ability, so we give them menu options. It can be in staffing, so if they may have a menu and they decide, I want X position, but not necessarily this position. It can be when we're at staffing, each campus decides, so we use a formula, but they decide what their master schedule looks like. And so there is autonomy at each campus level in that regard as well.
Okay. As we look through this, Tier 1 instruction came up, and I know we have a presentation coming, but how do we measure that and aggregate that at a district level for a board member who's not an educational expert to know if we're doing what we should be doing?
Absolutely. So in that presentation, I have 3 slides that creates a narrative for you on how a teacher would do that. But essentially, it's your formative assessments. It's your exit ticket. It's your checks for understanding. And that aggregates up to your summatives, right? So we have 9-week interims, right? So leading up to that 9-week interim, right, you have a set of formative checks, right? We also have universal screening, right? MAP is an example of our universal screening, right? But it's really those formative checks. So I was at Meadowbrook today, and before you walk into the classroom, you know what the lesson is, and you know what the demonstration of learning or the exit ticket will be, meaning that after the teacher has delivered the lesson, Tier 1 instruction, they're gonna run a check for understanding before kids leave for the day to really quickly see, right, a good exit ticket, really quickly see, got it, didn't get it, got it. And you hope that 80% of your got it, right, that's where the vast majority of students are. And so that would inform their reteach, that would inform what they spiral while keeping the pace, right? That's what would inform that. So it's those. And so in that presentation, created a narrative because I think that would best exemplify, and that's helped in past things I've done, where we took our 3rd grade literacy, a teacher in 3rd grade literacy on all the assessments available to them, formative and summative, and the time bands throughout the year leading up to the 9-week all the way up to STAR, how those would work in concert with each other masterfully to be able to track and know where your kids are at. So that's essentially how you would track and do that. And the goal is to bring more standardization and rigor in terms of how we do our formative assessments. You hear a lot about MAP, you hear a lot about STAR, But once we get going, we should be able to provide you a 9-week assessment results and be like, here's how many of our kids are projected to be at approaches or meets at STAR. That 9-week assessment is very new to our system, and so that would give us real-time data early on in the year between each 9-week assessment to tell us how many kids are headed for approaches, meets, masters, etc.
Okay. So prior to that 9 weeks, is there a number, that we should expect to see?
Prior to that 9-week, beyond the universal screening data, right, unless we completely standardize every exit ticket, right, and every day and every moment and every hour, every teacher delivered that lesson and completed it on time, we never bring formative assessment data to like an interim check or presentation. We could, but it just requires making sure, like similar to how we give MAP testing or STAR testing, by the end of that week, everyone has delivered the assessment. But one teacher could be delivering that formative, right, on a day where another teacher's not because of pacing and where they're at. But we can definitely have interim measures. We used to have unit assessments that are optional because we wanted to reduce testing and put more weight on the 9-week, but those unit assessments were required. So those unit assessments would be an example. Some teachers are using them, but we also give autonomy to sub that out with a formative assessment at the campus level.
Okay. And that's helpful. I guess one of the things that I'm still trying to, a lot of it in education is in theory. And when you have such a large district, in my opinion, we need more frequent information that's telling us what we're doing is right. And so I guess between now and next meeting, Dr. Ramsey, if we can think about what that might look like, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I know that you and I have had the conversation of bringing walkthrough observation data to the board so that the board can see patterns. It's not necessarily standardized in the way of a test, but it provides a qualitative look and some quantitative of what patterns that our campus leaders are seeing in classrooms as a touch point.
Yeah. And again, the ask is not more work for teachers or principals, but the stuff that you guys are already gathering, how can that be shared for us to understand, patterns? It'd be very helpful. The things that, matter. And then the other ask I have is when we're looking at this, what is the expectation? So if I look at one of these, it's an F-rated campus. What do we expect out of that campus from a delta on a year-over-year basis or an average?
The expectation should always be that you are raising every child and your campus grade at least one grade level. Like that needs to be the floor.
Okay.
Period. And so now that we know this test, we know we've gone through it. We know what it looks like. Our exit tickets are mirroring the rigor of the STAR tests. They're being framed in that way. Our kids are adapting, right? We need to be at a place where we are always moving our kids at least one grade level, right, as the bare minimum. Because again, think back to those. It takes 3 years to truly narrow the gap and close it. And so when that kid moves one grade level from one teacher and goes to 4th grade, that teacher also needs to do that. I'm thinking about the kids who did not meet. By the end of those 3 years, they should already be there, right? And at our high school, right, we have to go even further, especially if they're multiple grade levels behind. But the expectation is move every kid, right, at least one band up from did not meet to approaches to meet masters, and our school grades from F to a D to a C. But for our Fs, I always say the minimum has to be at least 2 levels to get to that C, to get out of that like funk and challenge that comes with it. Yeah.
Okay. And high school wise, is the CCMR lagging? Is that true?
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's because certain data comes in much later. The results come in much later. SAT, graduation, right, dual credit courses from community colleges, when the kid earned the associate's degree, it is lagging for that reason. And so we always put that asterisk, but at a certain point, the asterisk drops. For every graduating class, there's lagging data. Enlisting in the military, right, and having and confirming that data, right, and such. And so, and they got a whole lot tighter in how they measure that, because there were some districts you can read about in previous years where they were using military enlistments to drive up the high school score in a very superficial way when they weren't actually going. So they've gone in a whole lot tougher, which means delays in validation of that data.
So when we're looking at, the 2024 estimated grade, are we using 23, 24 CCMR, or is it prior to
It's
that?
the cohort of that class. So that graduating class, right, as they left high school, we're looking at their data from that previous school year or their last 2 school years. But it's specifically the lagging indicator is whatever else that they're doing that is, especially in the dual credit, especially in those who are graduating a little later, right, when we have our summer graduations, especially when you think about some of your associate's degrees or industry-based certification, they might be taken in the summer, and so that's why that's lagging. But it's that class that just graduated. I want you to think of it that way.
Okay. And the last question, if there's a theme, if you wanted to highlight 3 things, Dr. Ramsey, of the schools that moved in a positive direction, what would those 3 things be?
I'm going to drill it down to the dedication of the teachers in every single classroom and really engaged campus leaders that are moving the needle for their students. So we're seeing fidelity to the high-quality instructional materials. We're seeing bell-to-bell instruction, and we're seeing effective interventions when needed.
Okay, all right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Trustee Jackson.
Thank you, President Martinez. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for talking fast because I have questions on 6 slides. Starting with slide 7, and this isn't your department, but I just wanted to mention it. With our technology devices delayed, and our students this year are all online STAR once again, and some of them do not have access to technology at home, are we going to offer something special like special Saturday school? And I don't want to put you on the spot, just something for next time, perhaps.
I appreciate the question. First of all, we should be hopefully past all of our device woes and challenges, some unforeseen. Before this month ends, I don't want to talk about technology issues anymore, hopefully in our system. Hopefully, that's the hope, right? And we should have fixed a lot of these things. Some of it was unforeseen. Now, we have backup carts with Chromebooks where students can still simulate the experience, and so that's happening. And then we also had some campuses where, their enrollment was higher than it was. We really need to reach a point, and it's a budget investment, I would say, if you ask me for a wish list, is we need to not be one-to-one. One-to-one is not enough anymore, it's one-to-many. That's what we need to be at, 1-to-2, 1-to-3. That's where we need to be. So think about every child has a device 1-to-1, but our campuses have backup devices that they're able to easily sub out at that moment. We're not there right now in terms of the number. We are like literally at 1-to-1 in some places, and then increasing enrollment in some places to take from others. But we really need to a place where we're one-to-many, so we don't have questions of backup devices and such. So that's the goal, and that's what we want to pull off, and I believe we're on track to be able to do that, so.
Thank you. Dr. Ramsey, do you want to say something else? No, not at all. I just wanted to give parents and families some comfort there. On slide 12, I love this slide. I looked through it and then looked through the TEA portal, because that's usually where I go, because I'm kind of a nerd too, but don't tell anybody, and there aren't that many people here, so I think we're okay. We can be secret nerd society. But the numbers are off a little bit, and I know that ADQ cleans them up. Could somebody just explain that so the general public knows when they look at this and our numbers are different, the reason?
Sure. So a couple of things. One, we have more accurate data because we have the kids and the updates that we make. So think about campuses. That's why they have the process where TEA annually creates a window for us to be able to challenge data or challenge counts or challenge enrollment, because what you submitted originally and how many kids will be tested, that changed or that increased or that went down, or there was a human error somewhere. But in terms of this being on point and where we're at, because I also had the team go to TEA and do an additional check, because if we're going to say we are at C, we better be right. And if we're going to say we reduced the low performing, we better be right. So didn't just keep it at our ADQ team. We also, because we have good relationships over at TEA, we said, hey, check our work. Is this right? But they always also update their data as you get into like the fall, because the I forget what the term is here in Texas, but there's where you can challenge. Yeah, you could challenge your data and clean it up. They have create a window for it, and so we'll do some of that to be able to correct anything being off. But where we are at and overall, it's on point. It's not them that it's not us that we're wrong, it's that their data is lagging behind what we know because we have more real-time data and we're closer to our kids.
So for the general public also, we have a snapshot date last Friday in October, and you have to have been enrolled in that school district for that data to count in the spring. What TEA publishes is all students who took the test with that school district that spring. And sometimes the student may not have been here. So our case, if we have a student who was in Crawley ISD until November 3rd, they're included in the data that TEA publishes, but they are not in our accountability subset. And so this is our accountability subset based on the number of students who were here, the actual students that were here on the snapshot date and on the day that they tested.
Thank you so much. And that portal will update, and
Yes.
eventually we'll be one-to-one, but you don't want to be one-to-one, you want to be one-to-many.
For devices,
That's
not,
right.
not for numbers.
I know.
Numbers, I want to be
I know.
one-to-one.
Eventually. So the reason the board, if you'll remember that in January, we receive a taper report. It's because all of these scores are preliminary until they're finalized, and then the final accountability reporting turns into that taper report that each school district receives early in winter.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Okay, on slide 13, there are 10 different bullets, and thank you for all of them. But when I look through them, there are 3. Grade 4 reading English at the approaches and meets, grade 5 reading English at the masters, grade 5 reading Spanish at the approaches, grade 6 reading at the meets and masters level, that all went above 1%. And so if I look at that, and we have, they're about 57, we had 5 of about 57 cells. If you look at that by cells, that there are 3 options, either approaches, meets, or masters. And so when I looked at that, only about 5 of 57 had were at greater than 1% gain. Mm-hmm. So when we do the next presentation, what are your biggest areas of concern there? Mm-hmm. Because those were wins. That what are your biggest areas of concern and focus, and what are your plans for this year to remedy those? And again, that would be next time's question, but I just didn't want to pass it up when you've done such a great job at presenting
We will
tonight.
bring that back, and we'll bring back the context of how the state did, because it provides some really good context to see where we compare. And if the board would like, we can also bring back the Texas Urban Council districts so that you can see how we compare with like districts.
Thank you. And then I love the examples and the anonymity with regard to the teachers, teacher A and teacher B. I'd like to applaud those teachers, especially because Sagamore Hills in the 2nd District, where I'm blessed to represent. But I'd love for and Dr. Ramsey's done this before, I'd love for the public to hear from some of these teachers. And then I wonder, are there walkthroughs planned? And if you mentioned this earlier, I apologize for missing it. But
Yeah.
beyond just the teachers on the campus, but to have tours for other teachers.
Absolutely.
Is that something
so
planned?
that for you guys and the public, or for just
No,
amongst
for
ourselves?
the educators.
Yes, absolutely. As part of their work that school leadership is doing is, right, like, think about our middle schools, right? And all of our executive directors who work directly with our middle school principals, right? We have challenges in our middle school areas, but within middle schools, right, we have growth, and certain campuses are kicking butt and certain classrooms are kicking butt. So identifying those models and being very creative in how we leverage learning walks and peer-to-peer learning. And so that's a big thing the very first thing I did when I arrived here is show me my BA-rated schools, 10+ points. Show me places where the achievement gap between black and white is less than 10 points. That's the very first thing I did, because I want to be able to know where they're at. Are they across every trustee district? Are they across every high needs campus? Are they not just in the selective admission schools? They're not just at YWLA, right? I wanted to make sure where they're at to be able to map them and then be able to create learning experience around that. So yes, absolutely, that's plan, and frankly, that's how I want us to do professional learning. We've also had conversations with our principals, right, doing things like, rather than bringing them in one place, let's have them break up, right, and go visit another colleague's campus where that colleague, like, think about the Sagamore principal leading a learning walk with their principals during that principals meeting, rather than just being at the TLC. I love the TLC, it's a great space, but I don't always want them at the TLC. I want them to more have peer pressure, healthy peer pressure, to be able to grow and learn from them. And nothing is more powerful in learning from your colleague versus getting it from someone else. So that's the kind of culture that we want to be like normal in terms of how we operate.
I think that's so cool. Thank you for that answer. And then my final one, I know we'll be so happy, number 28. So when I looked at the PEIMS 2023 for us, we had 72,783 kids. And in 2024, we had 71,060. So when we look at the number of kids that decreased from 23 to 2024 on DNF campuses, I don't argue that we had kids that decreased, but I do question the number of 46,000 to 29. Are those real-time students now, or are we where did that data come from? How did you derive it? And it may not be you, it may be Chad and ADQ.
I will check with ADQ, but yes, those are real-time students currently attending, not attending low-performing schools that are active, that we also have STAR assessments with and are still continuously enrolled in our system. So that's important as well.
So the 46,000 are still here, and the 29,000
In terms of attending DNF-rated schools, yes,
Yes.
total enrollment count, yeah,
but they're
across multiple schools.
the same children?
Yes,
Okay.
it's the same children.
Okay.
It's that count of like those kids, right? If they were attending a DNF-rated schools, but across multiple schools, and now we have a significant reduction in that regard. Still too many, but we still need to improve that dramatically.
Well, and you would know my concern would be that if parents get a PEG list letter and they take their kids out of a D or an F school. So
Yeah.
that was my concern. So thank you, and thank you for answering all the questions, and thanks for your patience.
Of course.
Trustee Luevanos.
Thank you, President Martinez. Thank you for this report. Like Toby, I have also questions on different slides. So slide 5. The CCMR, do you think we have the increase, is it due to more students being enrolled in CCMR?
It's a combination of things. It's one, we are offering more dual credit, more opportunities to retest TSI in a more strategic manner. The Texas Success Initiative, which is the test that deems you ready for credit-bearing courses in English and math in community college. It is also expansion of AP, expansion of dual credit, expansion of on-ramps. It's all of those things. We're offering more ways to be CCMR while also increasing, right, in terms of them getting pathways that lead to, right, family-sustaining wages, whether they jump into a career, enroll in the military, or go straight into college. So it's not necessarily more kids enrolled in CCMR, more kids are hitting CCMR, are having multiple opportunities on their journey, some even as early as 8th grade, right, to be able to reach CCMR readiness. I mean, I went to some of our, we're offering AP Spanish, right? We're offering AP geometry in some of our middle schools, right? So we're starting early, but especially when it comes to that junior and senior year, we're offering a whole lot of ways. Most of our kids are getting it through TSI.
And we're going to continue to motivate students to enroll in these classes in the upcoming years.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason why no kid's pathway, regardless of whether they're going to the military or jumping into 2 years or a trade school or a 4-year or a tier 1 university, that whatever their pathway is between 9th through 12, right, but we want to go down to the middle school level, that they do not have the ability to enroll in a course that gets them CCMR readiness. Yeah.
Great. On the next slide, slide 12. On the previous
Slide.
a couple of meetings before this one, you know, I asked about why are we not showing the other side, the side that says, you know, it's not meeting. Do we have approaches, we have means, and we have masters. So the difference between that 61% to the 100% is, so grade 3 reading English, 39% is not on meet level, right?
Which slide are you talking about, so I know?
12, I'm sorry.
12. So you said,
So in previous years, we had like 4 different columns. And I asked on the previous meeting, because we had does not meet, and then approaches, and then meets, and then masters. So the difference between that 61% is that 39% of students are not meeting.
did not hit
Did not hit-
approaches. Yeah, did not hit approaches.
So we miss in that column all the way down, like grade 7 math. So 77% of our students are not there.
hitting at the meets level, but many of those kids hit at the approaches level, for example. So go ahead.
I'm just, clarity, is the question to resend to you what we previously, so I didn't understand the question, I'm sorry.
We are, the way I see this, like we are missing a number of the students who are not on.
Oh,
who are
that did
hitting.
not meet, yes,
Meet.
sir. Yes, sir.
So if approaches is 61%, and 61% is a combination of a 35% of meets and 11% of masters, so the other 39%, is that the students that are not on approaches?
Yes, sir.
So we are missing that column.
We will, yes, we will
Yeah.
resend that data
Yeah.
to you. We sent it a
It's in
couple
the
of,
extended
about a-
reports. It is that.
we
yeah.
sent it to the board
Yeah,
about a
yeah.
month ago, so
Got
we
it.
can
Okay.
resend that to them so that it's at the top of their email, yeah.
So like, you know, Spanish, grade 5 science Spanish, 87%, you know. Grade 7 math, 77%. So how is this data relates to MAP? Because in MAP, you know, we show great increases from beginning of the year, middle of the year, to end of the year. And on this data, for example, grade 6 to math, grade 8 math, on approaches we have minus numbers, And on meets, we have, it's a difference of, -2, -3. And on masters, we only have 1% increase on grade 7 reading. So how's that map data relates to this?
Yeah, so MAP serves two purposes, right? It's a universal screener across our system. So at the beginning of the year, it tells us where our kids are on some key foundational skills and knowledge. But it's also a predictor of where they are most likely to land on STAR, right? Especially that middle of the year data. That middle of the year data is, now, I don't know yet if the middle of the year data holds up with the new tests, right? It held up with the previous tests.
Yes, so Trustee Luevanos, you're actually, while this school district is not in the next lawsuit, you're bringing up one of the main points of the lawsuit, that all other exams, including MAP, that school districts across the state saw increases there, but it did not correlate to STAR, which is why across the state you saw significant declines in every test, every grade level, every student group. And so it's very possible that there isn't a correlation because no one saw it across the state.
I see, thank you. And then the next slide, I not to mention this. So we have grade format that move at approaches, meets, and master's levels. Do we know what did we do different in that grade, for grade math, that we're not doing in the other grades? Because other grades, they move the needle on one category or two, but not in all three.
Yeah, it's a combination of things, right? One, it's always important to remember that when we're doing these comparisons, you're not comparing the same kids. We always do this exercise every year, but we're not comparing the same kids. Those third graders are not those other third graders, but we're always making that comparison. So it's a matter of when kids are growing, right? And especially when you're behind 2-3 levels, right? Growing rapidly and closing that gap, right, for a class of 20 plus, right, that is very, very difficult, right? But you can get at least 50% of your kids to jump a level, and that's where we want our teachers performing. So it's a combination of things, right? Like how new is our curriculum? How many years have we've implemented that curriculum? Some have been around a longer period of time. Some are more fresh and new, and our teachers are adapting to it, right? So elementary, we have Eureka in math, and high school, middle school, high school, we have Carnegie, right? So it's just that getting more adapted to being able to use the curriculum with fidelity, and then just how we do interventions and such. So it really depends on the focus and where we've been. But I would say ultimately, when you're looking at that growth, I like to look at cohort data. So you would see a certain cohort of kids grow faster than another cohort because that cohort received 3 years of solid back-to-back instruction as they transition from grade to grade. So that's some of the things that are playing out as well. But I wouldn't be able to tell you right now in a diagnosis that we had some 4th grade initiative that we were just driving tutors there that ultimately led to that gain and such.
I'm almost done. So, slide 21. So, what are we doing, or what will we continue to do on these 5 secondary schools that continue to be successful campus from last year to this year, even though the test changed, but they continue to be an A campus? What are we doing there that are we not doing in the rest of the schools?
It depends on the school. So it depends on the school. It's not apples to apples when it comes to demographics and the baseline and where students are coming in. I wouldn't compare YWLA to any one of our schools because the way enrollment works and how those students come in. But it depends on the school, right? Does Avala, right, maybe more reflective in what's going on there? And again, I would point to more so like what I gave when I talked about those case study schools, right? It comes down to consistency, trustee. Ultimately, that's what that is, right? Like if you have a third grade reading team of 3 teachers, right? Are they in sync? Are they delivering lessons and strategies with fidelity in the same way? Are they growing at the same level? Are they sharing best practices? It's that consistency and maintaining that and making that systemic in a school system is the work. That's the work, right? We have all the good stuff in our system in place. We've adopted that. You've passed and you've adopted budgets that have prioritized the right things. It's about execution. It's about implementation. But in between all of that are adults and different issues and lockdowns and weather changes and laptops not like it's those kinds of things, being able to minimize disruption and being very tight on implementation. And so I would say any one of those schools, they're tight on implementation when it comes to those things. And again, I wouldn't compare every one of those schools to like a comprehensive high school, right, in terms of what they look like. Same thing with an elementary in terms of what that looks like. That's why I gave those case study schools, because the demographics of those schools that I went deeper in are more reflective of our majority of our 70,000 plus kids. Yeah.
And on the last slide, I know Toby mentioned this. I mean, great job. You know, we went down from 46,000 students to around 30,000 students. How many students were in 2023 total compared to 2024? Do you know?
Don't have that number memorized. I don't have it right here handy, but I would assume it was 70, right?
I don't want to give a number that isn't accurate, so I'd rather give that to you in writing.
Yeah, but we can get it while I'm here, I think, and hopefully one of my colleagues can bring it over. Yeah.
And we'll continue to provide, you know, like high, you know, you mentioned tier 1 lessons, especially to that 30,000 students that are still in the F&D campus. What kind of training will be providing to the teachers or administrators to focus on that tier 1? You mentioned 80% of that is on tier 1.
Yeah. So without going, because there's 50 things I can lay off that need to be true in every single one of those campuses in order to move the conditions. But the big thing I'm about, right, and I've talked to our team here and many of them who bring amazing talent and experience, it's real-time coaching. It's that PLC needs to be high functioning, it's real-time coaching. We don't do that enough. We don't do that. When we have big gaps between telling someone what they could have improved on, and by that time they moved up, versus in the moment coaching, right? I visited a school today, right? I was at Meadowbrook for 2 hours. So the executive director and the principal and her AP, we visited classes together and we observed a lesson. She was very clear on what the lessons was going to be, how students were going to demonstrate. They knew the lesson after that excellent tier 1. And then immediately after, what I want to see across our system and be true across every system, the executive director and the principal and the AP debriefed and talked about what's your next big step into improve that teacher's practice to another level, and when are you going to do it and by when. That's what we need to, that's an example of real-time coaching, right? And so we don't do that enough. And another level of real-time coaching is when a coach comes into a teacher's classroom as being able to provide in a loving and thoughtful way, whether it's been co-teaching or a quick, signal, right, on making an adaptation right in the moment. We don't do that enough. We want to get better, faster, smarter. We need to use real-time coaching in better ways. We have all the amazing stuff. We have adopted the right curriculum. We have the right data systems, right? I definitely want us to be able to staff, right, and have more veteran teachers and not new teachers and conditional certified, but that's a challenge across the system, right? I want all of our teachers to be TIA designated teachers so they can be making $100,000 because that's what they deserve, and this work is tough, frankly. But at the end of the day, I would say it's all about, for me, the X factor is being able to be not only data-driven, you hear that a lot, but it's that real-time coaching. People don't improve unless they get it on the spot and they know what to add.
And the only piece that I would add is also consistency. This year, the majority of our principal appointments were staff within the district. So coaching up, keeping our staff, and ensuring that there's consistency at the leadership level.
And I know it's not on this presentation, but how are we comparing this district to other similar districts, demographics and student body?
Yeah.
So we'll actually bring, when it comes to, and I know the board received this information a couple of months ago as well, but we can bring forward, on the achievement side, we're not where we want to be when it comes to growth or how the state or other urban districts declined. We outpaced our other urbans with the exception of Houston ISD.
Thank you. One last question. How long you been on this position?
Say that again?
How long you been on this position?
I'm a month in,
Morning.
but
Thank
not
you.
new to Texas, not new to Tejas. I was in Dallas between 2012 and 2017. That's the team that put in all those reforms that made Dallas the model. Mike Morath, commissioner, was a board member sitting right there where Trustee Lynch was every night. And then I was in San Antonio from 2017 to 21. And then I was state superintendent of Maryland, rebuilding an agency, and came back to Texas because my wife said she likes Texas better than the East Coast.
Great.
So here I am. But I've been here a month, but none of this is new.
Great. Thank you so much.
Dr. Ryan, did you have a? No, okay. Let's see, we're back to Trustee Bridges.
I'm sorry, this next question came to my mind as Trustee Lynch was asking another question. Have we noticed that when we were shifting resources from schools to that looked like there was some growth and we moved resources, and then when we look at the data when it came in, that they lost some ground? And how are we addressing that?
That's a great question. I have not run that analysis. You're going to make me want to run that analysis, but I do know when you take away the treatment. Dallas's ACE model that you've heard, that our land model was built out of their 1882 partnership. I always talk about Billy Earl Tate Middle School in Southern Dallas, right? High population of African American students. It was part of our ACE initiative. We were paying stipends to teachers, stipends to principals, stipends to AP, extended the school day, right? Did amazing coaching, moved to a B, and then took away the funding and took away the treatment, and many teachers moved, right, because they went somewhere else because of the challenges and to be able to have different pay. And we extended out, we changed the day, and today it's an F. So when you remove the treatment and when you remove the funding, absolutely you're not going to be able to pay for the things that you're maintaining, that extra coach, that extra duty pay for teachers to stay longer, to be able to plan, all those things. So I have not run that analysis here, but that's a great analysis. One of the things I often like to do is look at the per pupil of every campus and see with achievement on who is moving the needle and what their per pupil is. You're going to see some surprises too, where campuses with less per pupil are actually moving the needle, even though they look the same. But that's a great, I have not done that myself here since I've arrived.
So could we anticipate that?
Sure, we can look at that, absolutely. I mean, unless, I don't see why we should not be. We have 2 years of data now. We should be able to, it's publicly available data, the per pupil, that's a federal ESSA requirement. So we should be able to show you the per pupil dollars broken down by state and federal and any other special initiative dollars we're throwing at that school as a result of SPF or anything else, and what their achievement is. We can run that analysis. I have not since I've arrived.
Okay, I'm making a note of that too.
It's on tape, so it's
Oh,
gonna. I'm not gonna forget.
Well, I'll save the tape.
and they'll all remind me. So,
And I have witnesses anyway. Last question, the demographics, will that be on the demographics for each school on their website? If I pull up SS Dilla or whatever, that I could see in terms of where we are based on each demographic?
Ramesh, you may want to talk about this, the dashboard and that next iteration of dashboard. Can you, you'll have to turn on your microphone, there. Or they're going to turn it on for you, I think.
Turn on. So the first phase of OneSource that we demoed probably a couple of weeks ago, it just talks about like attendance and enrollment. Phase 2 is what we are working on, is like all the assessment scores. So yes, the answer is we can kind of like go based on school, campus, demographics and everything. So we can drill down all the way to campus, student, and any kind of like demographics. But phase 2 is like now work in progress.
I don't know if it's your mic, but I can barely hear you.
Sorry,
Maybe if it's the microphone, so that I believe the trustees were, or are in progress maybe, of being trained on OneSource, the dashboard. And so what our CTO was explaining is that phase 2 of that is to bring in all the assessment data. That way on each campus's website and the district website, anyone, a community member, is able to see all of that information. And so that phase 2 is what's happening right now. So it is coming, yes, sir.
So
Great question.
One small correction, it's right now only internal, not community. So just
Correct. But we're working on phase 2, and
Correct.
then, the purpose of all of this, once we get through the kinks, is to make sure that we publish.
Yep.
Trustee Lynch.
Just kind of looking at, you gave the statewide assessment trends. Can we anticipate STAR 2.0 being here for 10 years? Is that
No.
predetermined?
No, the Texas Education Code speaks to the commissioner and provides to him, it isn't actually a timeline, so it's periodic. What the commissioner chose to do because of COVID is kind of hold, and this time what it was unprecedented was that there was a redesign of both the test and the accountability system at the same time. We don't know, it's a legislative cycle, so that will start in January. There are conversations about what accountability should look like, what STAR and EOC should look like. And so I am never a betting gal, but definitely not during a legislative cycle. However, just based on the history, no, it's probably not for the next 10 years.
Okay, but for this year, yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
yeah, I would just add one other thing, just because I have a state level context. I was just in Maryland. I was in charge of administering this to our districts. A lot of states have already done what they just did here in Texas. They made it more heavy on reading, open response, simulating more AP. Like Texas was late to that, right? We had multiple layers of accountability. When you think about tax, too many levels, and we were talking about approaches at one point. The proficiency bar cut point was lower than other places in the country. Then we had that whole Common Core moment where standards were raised, all of that. So this new movement is actually playing catch up to a good chunk of the country. Massachusetts always ranks #1 on the national test. They did that in the mid-90s, and then they did a refresh. And they've held steady, and hence why the state has adapted. The student population and the teachers are teaching to that rigor. Maryland, the same thing, right? Like that algebra test in Maryland felt like an AP test to me. And so Texas is late to the game in doing that, and now they finally did it. And so I would hope they keep it steady for 10 years. Now the rules and 3Ds equals an F, they can always mess with that. But in terms of the rigor and the quality of the test, it's about time. They should have done it sooner.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess a follow-up question, when we're looking at 12 and 14, we're looking at differences. So we've had the same test 2023, 2024. So what kind of expectations do we have of growth in these? I mean, what is a number, Dr. Ramsey, that we're happy with in any category?
So when we talked about implementation of the strategic plan and we talked about the board goals and then how you implement is getting to every single campus, that looks a little bit different. So the Overton Park, the Tanglewood, our expectation is significant increases of all students in meets, right? And so every campus is slightly different, but for us, we want to, in the next 2 years, so get to a 3-year point where we're exceeding the national average at all grades. We want to be the exemplar in the state, and anything less than that would be unacceptable.
So what does that mean numbers-wise?
So right now, as a country, about 55%, I think that's the last number, 55% of third graders are reading on grade level. And so we want to exceed that so for us, that is the floor.
And for us, that's at meets, correct?
Generally speaking, I think most people understand that to be that, but that's not exactly what that means.
Okay. Can you tell me what that means?
So for the STAR test, the various bands really talk about student success for the next academic year. And so if a student approaches grade level, and we know that approaches is passing per se, but what approaches means is that in the next grade level, the student will be successful with significant intervention. If they meet, they will be successful in the next grade with minimal. And if they're at masters, they're going to be successful in the next school year. So the STAR actually is kind of a predictor for how students are going to do in the next academic year. We're looking at how they did in their current year, but the bands mean something slightly different.
Okay. So is it fair ask then that we should look at, depending on where a kid was, how much intervention they're receiving in that following year? Is that a?
Yes, correct. I think that's the starting point of that ESSER work and doing the academic return on investment and having a school performance framework. Because a school performance framework, remember, is not only opportunity campuses, but it's opportunity students. And so it speaks to all of those additional opportunities and services that a student receives. So we should be able to look at that and see, are we receiving, is the student receiving basically an academic return on investment based on the interventions they receive?
Okay. All right, thank you.
Trustee Phillips.
Thank you, President Martinez. So thank you for this presentation. This presentation was more of an overarching big picture look at the district. We were also provided a campus breakdown aspect of things. So I know you have another presentation. Is that part incorporated into that, or can I ask questions about that one now?
The campus-based breakdown was going to be part of this presentation with you having the 150-page view of it. And
Yeah, gotcha.
But if you want to ask me something very specific about a specific campus, I will try my best based on my 30 visits, and hopefully they're one of the 30. If not, I'm going to phone a friend right here in this corner and somewhere, and they're gonna help me out. That's why they showed up. And so if you have something very specific, like, you know, how long has that principal been there? Are they fully staffed?
Sure.
Don't ask me what their middle name is. I'm not able to answer that yet. So.
Sure. No, not a problem. And it's not diving into the weeds too far on any of the campus level that way. It's just that's where my questions and comments kind of ruminate from. One is just in the sense of, as I'm looking at some of the 2024 estimated scores, the estimated score, you know, we have a few campuses that have an estimated score of 70 or 71, and yet we projected that letter grade to be a D. So I'm trying to see how that translates, because the way I was in school, starts with a 7, it's a C, starts with an 8, it's a B, right, and so on and so forth. So if we got a 70 or a 71, how are we projecting that to be a D instead of a C?
Because it's not enough no longer just to grow kids. You have to also close the gap. And that other part of remember it's 70-30, that 30% is close the gap. So you gotta really the pace of improvement is not enough. That's where people are having a lot of beef at the state level.
Sure.
Where like you had these schools move up 10 points, they were a B during, you know, the 21-22 school year, and now they have tanked even though they grew, and it doesn't make sense. It's just they have raised the floor in terms of what the pace of improvement should be in the state of Texas.
Okay, indeed. So, and so realistically, we would look at some of these that are at 70. So, I mean, so as a matter of fact, we have one, Howell Elementary, that was a 71, that was a C, dropped 1 percentage point to a 70, and is now also gonna drop a letter grade because of doing so?
That's what it's projected to be based on the new methodology. It's the pace of growth and the closing the gap. That's the one that I would look at. It's relative performance. So relative, right? So it's your like, think about, so the growth, it's best of achievement and growth. And then on growth, there's overall growth, and then there's relative growth. They put you in like a group of schools that are like you across the state, and they rack and stack you. So their growth is not as significant as others who serve similar students. So they definitely need to like punch above their weight in order to get those relative growth points. So
And it's a great reminder. About a year ago or so, we presented and we shared that across the state, we, as superintendent colleagues in school districts, knew that we would have schools that actually increased in achievement, and yet their grade went down. And so how you tell that story to your community was of concern across the state. And we have that. We have, throughout the state of Texas, we have schools that grew in achievement, but yet they actually went down a letter grade.
1 percentage point, and you still didn't even fall out of the bracket, right? So it's one thing going from 1 percentage point, and you still didn't even fall out of the bracket, right? So it's one thing going from 80 to a 79, and most of us that have had, you know, some level of education began to understand, okay, you're going to drop a letter grade because you're from a B to a C, but you dropped within the same bracket, 1 percentage point, and yet what's going to be emblazoned is, oh, that's a D campus, right? So these contextual things matter. So I appreciate the answer, and you're hitting the nail on the head. Even with, I guess, some of the theme, I didn't realize the pattern was emerging. But in some of my questions around that is around how are we making sure that that context is really displayed for our community, for them to really be educated on what does this score actually mean and how it goes about. Again, both ways, right? Not just to pat ourselves on the back and say, see, it's not as bad, but even for the ones that are, okay, what does that really mean in context? And of course, we're about to get into tier 1 instruction about how those things grow, but that context really matters. I think you're about to add something to that.
I was just gonna add, so we will put the bullhorn on contextualizing and an urban district on the rise that eventually we need to be the model for exceeding nationally, period. We're also part of the Council of Great City Schools, so my comparison group is just not Dallas, it's all of the urbans, it's LA, it's Miami, it's et cetera. The other piece that matters is how your local press and external group and media tell that story as well. I just share that because if I look at how Dallas's drop from a B to a C is told, and Dallas is still held up as a model, and I know because I have a chip on my shoulder for that work that we did, long board meetings and nights, we put in some important work that stood the test of time, and I look at how they talk about where they're at versus, I have not dug into what it looks like here yet, I'm too new, but that matters as well. We could do a lot as the district, but at the end of the day, it's also other things as well. I was just reading Plano last night, and they joined the lawsuit, and they had 133% increase in DNF rated schools. And the piece was very sentimental to their effort to challenge the state. And they're complaining about validity and readability and pushing it and saying it's not right. And for students who are historically disadvantaged, the state is doing an injustice. I don't agree with any of that, right? Because they should be punching above their weight when you think about the concentration of poverty in a place where there's a strong middle class presence. But just even the way that was written, right, and how they're joining is very different than other places in other parts of town and stuff. And then same thing in Houston, you have some that are cheering the district on where they're at, and some, even though they grew amazingly, are saying, even though they took from 30 to 60, they're saying 40% of kids are still failing. And that's the takeaway versus this monumental task today. So that matters as well. I just haven't taken that in yet. You guys would know more than me, but that matters as well in terms of us winning hearts and minds at the end of the day, right? So
Sure. And yeah, and I appreciate that. And even to what you said, context, not excuses, right?
Absolutely.
And we can do that, right? We can do context without the excuse. We can just put it out there what it is, give the parameters of what it actually looks like, and not have to excuse, because our communities don't want to hear that either about what excuse we're going to come up with. But as a thing, being privy to the things that we're privy with, people in this administration, people in this boardroom for sure, we don't want to excuse things anyway. We want to tackle these things head on. But there really is contextualization to what some of these things look like. So that is our job to make sure we do that. So even when we're working with media partners, making sure that we are feeding the information that's supposed to be fed. Now, what they do with it, again, we're not over the media, right? But feeding the proper information to make sure it is out there. And then we have our own platforms to make sure that we're putting proper information, right? So alongside that, and thank you for that about the C and the D aspect of things, you said earlier as well about kicking butt, right? That there are some campuses, there are some teachers, there are some classrooms, right, that are kicking butt. As I'm combing through this set of data that you displayed for us here, as far as when this campus breakdown, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that every one of our high schools either maintained or improved when it comes to even under this new, as we're figuring out the scoring system and everything, each one of our high schools, every single one of them, either maintained or improved. Am I correct about that?
that is correct. And then 3 of them, 15% of them were 3 points away from a D to a C to a C to a B. 2 were 3 points away from to a B. So they're just right there as well too. It's all within striking distance. That's why I also told you about those kids. 20% of our kids in certain grades were 3 questions away from right meets, approaches, masters. Like we are like right there to like reach a whole other league, right? And
Yeah.
so that's important. Yeah.
And we got to make sure to put that out there, right? And I'm saying we from a holistic standpoint, but communication, all these things, we have to put that out there because I know for sure, Brother Bridges talked about it a little bit ago about those conversations you're having in community. There's people afraid to put their kid in one of Forward ISD high school. I'm not sending my kid to Wild. I'm not sending my kid to Dunbar. But yet, every single one of our high schools either stayed where they were, either maintained or grew. And then so many of them, as I'm sitting there looking at this, had double-digit gains, right? As far as where they were able to go, as far as with their difference between 2023 and 2024, I'm looking at 18, 12, 25, 17, like double digits in how they were being able to grow. We have to be able to tell more about that because 2 things can be true. We have to be doing more for our students. We have to be building up African-American students, English second language learners. There's things with special education. We have to be building these things up. But our community also don't have to be afraid of our schools. And then we actually do have gains when it comes to these things, right?
Absolutely. The A through F, I'm a fan of the methodology. I'm not a fan of the actual grades himself because it's like a scarlet letter. And so when you're growing, you could be moving from an F to a C and have amazing growth, meaning that the vast majority of the kids are growing at that campuses. But at the end of the day, when you think about our just human nature, when you see a C versus an A or somewhere else, you make decisions. And it's not like real estate methodologies and what they use, which is just straight proficiency, which tracks with class, right? That's not helping either, right? And so there's that challenge as well too. But that the label, in terms of the methodology, the growth, the closing the gap, I'm an absolute fan of that. Like we should raise our game, whether you're a rich district, poor district, whatever that is. But the scarlet letter phenomenon because of human nature and how we sell houses and how that feeds into that as well too. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, no one is, that at least that I'm aware of or in the immediate vicinity of, is resting on their laurels when it comes to any of these things. excuse-making in any way, but we do a drastic disservice as well when we don't point out who is kicking butt, right? How the butt is being kicked, right? And now there really is growth, things are happening, right? And so, and I know that President Martinez, her and I have been singing it forever, right, about communication and putting those things out there. And I've even seen improvements in that, even in your short time, Roxanne, you dope. So, so it's happening, but just reiterating that. And I would say, lastly, just talking about contextualization, using Riverside Applied as an example. When we look at this, it would say they were a B, they maintained a B. They started as an 80, they got up to 89. 9 points of growth. That's beautiful. But that story is not told because it's going to be, they were a B, they're a B campus now. How much work went into how much butt kicking was happening, right? To be able to say we went from 80 to 9, you know what I mean? Like nearly that double digit gain that some of these others are able to tout. Like just that context matters tremendously. So anyway, appreciate this and thank you for this information.
Trustee Ryan?
Just a few, since we're talking about school scores and throughout the district, we had 37 schools, or 37% of our schools that went down in scores. What are we doing to make sure that they're all improving? Now, some of those were down 1 or 2 points. I think 17 of the schools were down 1 or 2 points. And I'm, when tabs goes from 97 to 96, that's not a scary thing at all. But we had a number that did go down. What do we do to go back and address so all of them?
Absolutely. So there's fundamental things that just need to be true in every one of our schools, right? High quality tier 1 instruction, amazing PLCs, amazing coaching, right? A school leadership team that is, right, constantly supporting their teachers, making sure those schools are properly staffed, making sure their budgets are great. Those things have to be true all the time, right? Then there's very contextual things of that school, right? Like today, I learned, right, at Meadowbrook, right, they had a first-year teacher who came in and joined one of their subjects in math, and they struggled, right, and then they left, right? So there's contextual things in each one of the schools where we have to, so we had to change in terms of how we support those kids because they were sixth graders and they didn't get the instruction that they should be getting like all their other sixth grade peers. So the seventh grade team has to do so much more work, right, that we need to lean into those kids. So that's just an example of a storyline that is true for Meadowbrook, right? But like you give me another campus, I will tell you what the more nuanced detail is on that level. They can tell you better than I do because they hang out with them all day. But that's where I would go. But in terms of structural things, high quality tier 1, implementing curriculum with fidelity, making sure that they are very responsive to what their data is, making sure the quality of student work is aligned to the STAR, right, aligned to the standards, right, and then that real-time coaching piece, making sure there's rapid improvement and feedback at the right moment, and then just running that over and over again.
Yeah, so we look forward to being able to present that Tier 1 presentation, and I know the board has already received that, because it really does tell the story of now what? There were improvements, we're still not where we want to be. What are we doing? What's the work to ensure that every campus continues to grow?
I think the final thing I would ask with the scores is on the schools that really need a lot of help. There were some that went down 8, 10, 12, 14 points. Do you have extra things you're doing to help them to fix that? Because that takes a lot of work to fix those schools.
Yeah, so every support is differentiated. Some things are universal, right? Some things, if we fundamentally do to support our schools in a consistent way when it comes to curriculum, but it's not, we have to make sure it's consistent, right? And we have to make sure it's true regardless of school, right? That will drive the needle. But other things have to be highly differentiated. So depending on the school, again, that would have that conversation with you on what that is. But yes, absolutely, we should be doing that. Even how our school leadership executive directors are content coaches in literacy and math, how often they're at the schools weekly versus biweekly versus once a month. We've even shifted that based on our school performance framework. Even how we allocate resources and an extra coach, an extra, not take away teachers despite enrollment drop because of, right, the need of that school based on our school performance. We've done all those things, and that's more active this year than any other year that it's been.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. Thank you, team, for the presentation. Thank you, trustees, for your questions. At this time, we will hear public comment addressing items on the agenda. Let me remind you that because of restrictions by the Texas Open Meetings Act, board members may not engage in a verbal exchange about a subject that has not been posted. We will listen and take notes, but the board is prohibited from responding to any inquiries made during a board meeting on any topic not posted on the agenda. However, the board may reply with 1, a statement of specific factual information given in response to the inquiry, 2, a recitation of existing policy in response to the inquiry, or 3, direct the person to visit with staff about the issue. No presentation may exceed 3 minutes unless the speaker has prior approval for additional time because of the use of a translator. Speakers who require the assistance of a translator are permitted double the allotted time of speakers who do not require the assistance of a translator. Speakers, when your name is called, please approach the podium by going to the back of the room, down the stairs, and coming up the sidewall on your right. And as soon as the speaker begins speaking, the time clock will begin. Our first speaker is Dwayne Ine, followed by Scott Blanco Davis. So we have.
Good evening, school board members, trustee. My name is Dwayne Ine, a resident of Fort Worth and a husband to a former teacher of Fort Worth ISD, Miss Amanda Ine, and a proud parent of 2 young men driving in Fort Worth ISD. I would like to speak on what is hindering Tier 1 instructions. As a husband of former Fort Worth ISD school teacher, I've seen my wife's spirits crushed because of a loud, toxic environment under the leadership of Dr. Ramsey. To this day, plenty of current Fort Worth ISD school teachers still notify us about their own toxic environment that they had to endure. These past weeks, my wife had fielded calls from Fort Worth ISD teachers from several different campuses, from lack of computer technology not working properly because software upgrade that was done despite the warning of IT workers who had served the district faithfully. Teachers described not having the proper resources to make copies on because of failure of the administration to pay the contractors of their copier company. Teachers having to turn in lesson plans that take hours upon hours to complete. Teachers being micromanaged by having to fill out documents just to track how long it takes them to take a group of students to the bathroom. Teachers will be able to give great Tier 1 instructions with the lesson plans already implemented in the curriculum. These lesson plans, the micromanaging of teachers in a toxic environment, is burning out these veteran teachers and driving them out to teach in other districts. I'll leave you with this closing remark. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Now we'll have Scott Blanco Davis, followed by Marisol Herrera.
Good afternoon, board. Dr. Chowdhury, I would like to thank you because you hit a lot of the stuff I was coming to talk about. So let's talk about accountability. Who's accountable for my AP and on-ramp students missing 200 plus minutes a week because their bus doesn't show up till 9 o'clock. Okay? We got buses showing up at 8:30, 9 o'clock. Are you going to pay them back for the credits they miss because they don't get their AP? That's about $3,000. So I just put my daughters through school. I know what that's costing my kids, and it's not right. They should have their bus there. I sat with kids till 6 o'clock yesterday waiting for a bus. That's not right. So where's the accountability? We can't grow the scores if the kids aren't in the classroom. And we have 3 to 4 buses every morning late. Now let's go into the other accountability. You cannot have a program unless the teachers buy in. Recently, a group of teachers asked me to come here and talk to you, and they won't even let me tell you what school they're in, because now they just want to be left alone. They are TIA exemplary teachers in an outstanding school who simply wanted to make sure that the program coming in was as good as the one they're using. They asked for clear directions, a clear plan. And when they didn't get one, they said, hey, what's the research? What's your research on this? Where are your numbers? We want to back it, but we want to see it's proven. They said, where's your data? You know, because data is important. I look at it 3 times a week for almost an hour. But the bilingual department's not giving them any data or any research. Instead, they learned the lesson of don't ask questions because they got a walkthrough by multiple people, went through their folders, then claimed that these TIA teachers that are exemplary, some of them only missing masters by 1 or 2 points, didn't know what they were doing. They're going to be re-educated, and they're told they need to go back to the same workshops they've already done twice. So when you talk about accountability and buy-in and rebound, what is the rebound when you take nearly 400 years worth of teaching? These teachers have 30 years each. And you tell them, hey, we're not only not going to give you the data to prove it's good, we're going to retrain you. I promise you, they learn not to ask questions, and they even asked me not to say their school name.
Time.
This, it makes me sad. I had
Thank you. Next up, Marisol Herrera, followed by Meredith Bowman.
Good evening. Good evening, Dr. Ramsey and trustees. My name is Marisol Herrera, and I am speaking to you today as an alum of Fort Worth ISD, a parent of a student in the district, a district employee, and the president of the Fort Worth ISD Council of PTAs. One of Texas PTA's legislative priorities is to pursue legislation impacting the state's A through F school accountability system. We advocate for an accountability system that more broadly reviews school performance and includes a family engagement component. We do not believe that the STAR test alone can accurately capture the growth of our students and all the work our educators do to support them on a daily basis. I urge you to continue to look at diverse data sources, including the family engagement component, and to invest in a variety of supports for our students. Remember, the pandemic was a traumatic event for us all, and it will take time and multifaceted supports for our students to recover from the harm it caused. Beyond academic interventions, I'd like for you guys to keep in mind social-emotional supports, the arts, after-school activities, family engagement programs, and mental health supports, because they are all crucial to ensure that our students continue to grow and to succeed. The decisions you make impact my family and my community. So please keep this in mind as you look at all of these data sources. Beyond numbers, the children they represent need us to unite and invest in all aspects of their development. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up is Meredith Bowman, followed by Donna Collins.
Good evening, Board. I'd just like to take a minute to recognize Mr. Hansen from Ms. McLean's 6th grade. My daughter was there when she was in 6th grade. He passed away this weekend in a bicycle accident, and I just wanted to bring awareness to this and acknowledge how much influence he had on the students. He was my daughter's science teacher, and all the kids loved him. I believe he was getting ready to start teaching a STEM class starting this week, so I ask that we just keep his family and all those that knew him in our prayers. I have a few things after listening to this. I normally plan my speeches, but this evening I did not want to listen. I'd like to point out that it's interesting that there are so many positive comparisons with the fact that this test was all online for the very first time ever. I'm very concerned with this data, especially looking at the PEAMS results, that the test isn't the same as 2023, saying that it was online. That's confusing to me. I wonder what happens when the real data shows something completely different. I want to know how this information was put together. What's the formula Fort Worth ISD used to do this? And is this explanation easy to find and read with the data that was given this evening? I'm noting one interesting circumstance regarding TEA and STAR. I've heard all students failed the writing part of the test because TEA used AI to grade the essays, so it had to go back to people grading it. There was a very interesting statement that someone spoke this evening saying they supported school choice, and that's coming from a public school employee. That is also a concern to me. By the way, subs are not being onboarded right now because the director resigned this year. We have subs waiting to start but are unable to begin subbing. Teachers do not get to make their master schedules, by the way, just letting you know that. By the way, also, some students still don't have their own devices. I've heard from teachers that is still happening right now. My last comment is just a recommendation to all the school board members. This is coming from me being a teacher myself, and lots of things teachers have been stating lately that have shared with me. I highly recommend that every one of you school board members find out what schools you represent and attend those schools. Just walk through the schools. After hearing that we are going through the strategic design plan being asked, that it would be a very important thing that you actually see what's going on in the buildings. The teachers know. The teachers don't need more training. The teachers need to be allowed to teach. We know it works. We know the basics and know how and what works. The failing students are not the teacher's fault. Go and talk to the teachers. They can tell you what will help them be successful. The teachers need you, and the students need you.
Donna Collins, followed by Missy Cara.
Hi, my name is Donna Collins. I am the Volunteer Freedom Lead for Tarrant County Citizens Defending Freedom, and I do reside in Fort Worth. I had a couple questions about the content of this presentation. First is, who are the bigots of soft expectations? Is that the parents or the teachers? That was a very strong statement to make. Other than that, I want to just start with what I'd planned on saying. The week that school started, a friend of mine sent me a message about her friend, who is a teacher in Fort Worth ISD, not being able to teach at all because of inappropriate student behavior. Yesterday, there was a published article about this very issue. They cited a report by the RAND Corporation where 60% of teachers nationwide were experiencing burnout. The most common cause of teacher burnout was student behavior, seconded by pay. The third reason was the abundance of paperwork, evaluations, and other administrative tasks. And from what I've read on social media, this third item has become a big issue for teachers within Fort Worth ISD. I find it interesting that accountability is on the agenda. No one seems to be held accountable. Students aren't. Administration isn't. I've seen messages from teachers frustrated with lack of discipline, frustrated with high levels of elementary students and middle schoolers and that can't read or even know what vowels, consonants, or nouns and verbs are. This is a failure. This summer, Dr. Ramsey presented data showing that less than 1/3 of students meet expectations. It was stated that students can progress to the next grade if they approach expectations. Still, 50% didn't even approach. This is a failure. Yet, the presentation also showed that 90% of 90+% graduation rate from elementary school, from middle school, and from high school. I still don't understand how that can be. It doesn't jive. This is a failure. 2 weeks ago, you ignored your constituents' concerns about the proposed tax rate. The comments were 6-1 in favor of a no new revenue rate, but you approved it anyway. Thank you to Trustees Lynch and Ryan for proposing a lower rate and for voting against the new rate. Fort Worth ISD is failing. You, the board, and Dr. Ramsey should be highly embarrassed that Mayor Mattie Parker had to come here and tell you that you are failing our community. We, the people, will hold the board accountable in May. Dr. Ramsey works for you. You work for us. Thank you and God bless.
Missy Cara, followed by Amy Super. Okay, Amy Super is our final speaker.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to say, specifically to the superintendent, I take no joy in showing up here month after month and criticizing, but I'm a member of this community. I live in Fort Worth ISD community. I've been here 27 years. I am a stakeholder. My kids did graduate. I have grandchildren now in this district. I take this very personally. So I'm going to continue to have to come back. It's not my job to make you feel better about failing. It's not my job to make you feel better when I have to point out things that are done incorrectly, when data is not presented properly. This fiasco tonight of this report, thank you, Trustee Brooke, I'm sorry, I'm going to say your name right, Wallace Bridges, for bringing up the fact that we didn't get the aggregated data for the demographics. That's appalling. Don't tell me it's available. Don't tell me they had it. Can I get it? Are you going to make it available onto the website? If you don't, that's an F for you on that. Okay, we'll move along to what's the next thing? Closing the gap data not provided. Okay, I just covered that. Highlighting the importance of great teachers. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Super important. My daughter-in-law quit teaching last year. My daughter won't come back to the United States to teach here in Fort Worth. There's a reason for that. You lost your Teacher of the Year to charter schools. If we can't keep these quality teachers, the ones you're highlighting in this report, how many of them are even in the district this year? The percentage of teachers we have with less than 5 years experience is incredibly high. That concerns me as well. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? The CCMR data. I'm going to keep hammering you on that one only because when the scores from the TEA are telling me that half of your graduating students are not passing the final course subject matters, help that make sense for me. How do we have an 86% graduation rate when they're not passing course subject matters? That's never going to make sense to me. And I'm talking about CCMR kids being ready to go to college. How are you ready to go to college if you can't pass basic subject matters? I gotta raise my eyebrows on that one too. 40 seconds. Buses running late and costing kids time in their AP classes. Yeah, you get enough for that too. Devices, I'd like to know how many of the millions of dollars we spent on iPads and Apple laptops came back in working condition this year. I'm hearing not so many. That's an F. I still don't have an org chart for your admin. That's an F. And I've been told that I'm using the F word too much. And by that, I mean the word fire, so I'm not going to use it again. I'm just going to ask each of you to please hold her accountable. We have failure on our hands. Our district can't take much more of this. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts this evening. Thank you, Dr. Ramsey and team, for the presentation. Thank you, trustees, for your questions and comments tonight and engaging in a conversation centered on student achievement. The time is 7:58 and this meeting is adjourned.